You ready?
Yeah, man.
Chris, thank you for joining me. I feel like we've been trying to have this, we've had like 1,000 conversations, but now we're finally recording.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you having me. Big fan of what you do. I know firsthand how good you are at what you do. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. Honored to be here.
Absolutely. Why don't you tell everybody about you, who you are, and what you do?
Yeah. So Chris Clark, obviously, grew up in Anderson, graduated from T.L. Hanna High School there in 2004. And so I'm an upstate native. I was there my entire childhood, was born in Greenville, lived there. Uh, Came to the University of South Carolina in 2008, or before that, obviously, I graduated in 2008. Met my wife at USC and put down roots here. Just never left. Go back to the upstate to visit some. Grew up probably 20, 25 minutes or so from Clemson, but we've stayed here ever since because I met my wife. She's from Irmo. Um, Jobs here, families here. Still have some family in Anderson, and have just been rock and rolling ever since. And got a chance, out of college, basically 1 year or so out of college, to kind of do this dream job that I get to do now, working in the sports media. Before that, I thought about being an attorney. That was going to be my path, and I've taken a much different one. But it's been fun and interesting for sure.
So let's talk about that job, right?
Yeah.
On this series, I've had teachers, I've had recruiters, I've had bankers, fairly common things. It's not every day somebody comes across a sports media football recruiting expert. So how did you get into it?
The funny thing is that I was not a big college sports fan growing up. My dad and I would watch NFL, NBA. It really wasn't until, late in high school and then when I got to college that I really got into college sports. I always loved sports and always liked writing. I was much more of a writing guy, creative type of things than math or science, for instance. And so I was always comfortable with it from that standpoint. And I guess maybe that was one reason I was drawn to, maybe wanting to be an attorney. So um, out of college, while I was in college, rather, I worked for a couple different attorneys. I was a runner at a law firm, and then I was a legal assistant for a criminal defense attorney in Columbia. And later in that, I was doing some part-time writing. So I just kind of really I got like the recruiting bug. So I was on Gamecock Central like all the time, and on the internet and soaking up any bit of information that I possibly could, and really just caught that bug. Love college sports, love recruiting. And obviously with me going to South Carolina, the Gamecocks. And so I would just kind of dive into that. And I got a chance to do some stuff part-time where I would just dabble in that. I will admit a lot of times when I was working on, in between doing some legal work, I was writing something or looking up something. So I did actually, my boss, Randy Huff, an attorney downtown, who's a great guy and a great attorney, actually hired me out of college. So I graduated in 2008. And for, close to a year, I worked for him full time as a legal assistant while I was doing some writing on the side. And I don't like to really use the word luck, just me personally. I think it's more of like a blessing situation where I was actually talking to my boss, Brian Shoemaker, about the possibility of moving over and doing some or some part-time work for him. He hit me up one day and said, "Hey, actually, I have an opening for a full-time position. Would you like to talk about that?" I said, "Sure." Talked with my wife about it, with Carolyn, and was blessed to get that job, and I've been doing it ever since. So 13 years now.
So people that aren't familiar with South Carolina sports probably don't understand um, the name Tony Morrell is synonymous with Gamecock recruiting, like the original Gamecock insider. There's always an adage that you never want to be the guy to succeed the guy. You did. You followed Tony because he went to a competitor. And not only did you succeed the guy, but you have done an incredible job in doing so. What kind of pressure was that like to step into that situation?
Well, I appreciate your kind words. Here's the thing. The pressure, I did feel it, right? But in a lot of ways, I was so green, I had no idea what I was stepping into. I really didn't. So I think I was a little bit aloof about it at the beginning. I knew it was important, right? But it took quite a while to go, man, this is serious, right? And I took it serious and I worked very hard. I had kind of a runway to where I knew I was going to be taking that job. I knew my start date. And so I really worked hard at the outset to uh, do, some background work, building sources and talking to people and getting material ready to where I was, from a content standpoint, able to jump right in. The thing that I'm very, very glad about, that I'm very grateful for, is that people gave me a shot, right? Like I think about me as a consumer. At that point, I may have gone, "Who is this guy?" I definitely would have gone, "Who is this guy?" Hopefully, I would have given him a shot, but a lot of people did. And I think another stroke of fortune is that you think about that time, 2009. South Carolina had just signed, Stephon Gilmore, Devontae Holloman, uh, a lot of guys, DJ Swearinger, a lot of guys in that class. And they would obviously go on to have kind of their golden years after that. So I think that helped. If the team was terrible, maybe also Chris Clark is by proxy terrible at that point. So that was definitely helpful. But I think, I felt the pressure because I knew it was a very competitive market. I knew who I was following. I knew this audience and this rabid fan base. But I honestly think it helped me not having as much experience, knowing like what I was going into. I found out very quickly, right? Because you get on the internet and you're like a public sphere. People are not afraid to tell you if they think you stink or whatever. And I've heard that continuously over the years. And so, you develop a thicker skin and certainly learn along the way. That the amount that I've learned and kind of evolved since then has been absolutely amazing. I made tons of mistakes. I made a million mistakes probably in the first few days. In the first couple years, I still make mistakes, but it's been a growth process, and I'm thankful for that.
You mentioned building sources. Since you came on as the Gamecock Insider, you've had Spurrier, you've had Muschamp, and now you've got Beamer. How do you go about reestablishing or establishing new sources after a coaching change?
Well, I think it's a relationship business, and like people say that as a punchline, like when they're talking about recruiting, but it really is. I think to do this job, you have to do it consistently, and there's so much now to back up. So I want to make sure I said this. Like, it's not enough now to just call somebody and like write a story and put it on the internet. Like that used to be the job. It's not anymore. Now you have to be good on camera. You have to do podcasts. You have to do customer service. Like if you're going to be effective, in my opinion, as like a media person or a sports writer, whatever you want to call it, that you have to be so good at so much, or try to be so good at so much. And I think the relationship part is something that you have to be really good at. You look at some of the, best people in kind of the media space, and what do? They're really good at building relationships. And so you can't just call somebody when you need something, you know?
Mhm.
And so there are certain people that are around, kind of ingrained in the fabric of, to use South Carolina as an example, they've been here, maybe they're not on a particular sports staff, and there's always turnover, whether it's under the same coach or under different coaches. There's always turnover. So I think it's just about trying to help people. I think it's about building relationships, about having kind of a reputation about how you do
Mhm.
things that precede you, so that when new people do come in, they know, hey, this person has X reputation, and that can be negative, that can be positive. I personally try to do things to where people have a positive opinion of how I do things. Hopefully that's the case. So I think it's just hard work, building relationships, not approaching people as if you need something all the time, but just being there to have a conversation, and having that conversation the entire year.
To me, I think all of that advice is not unique to your profession. It's unique
Sure.
to everybody. Don't just call somebody when you need something. Like, check in.
Hmm.
Um, and relationships last. Transactions don't.
Absolutely.
Um, I do want to hit on the Garnet Trust, right? You guys
Yeah.
have led the charge for South Carolina in name, image, and likeness. Obviously, the NCAA is looking at NILs and NIL collectives. I know personally the Garnet Trust has done everything the right way. But do you see potential changes afoot for how NIL is going with collectives?
It could. I think there's so many different layers to this thing, right? Because the NCAA now is, basically trying to put the genie back in the bottle, which is going to be very difficult. Even if they try, you've got potential legal challenges, et cetera, et cetera. It's really hard to predict. A lot of people, depends on who you talk to. A lot of people are very skeptical that they'll be able to do anything at all to kind of police the space because they let it go unchecked for so long. They didn't provide a solution. They wanted to rely on Congress to provide it. Shocker. When you do that, the government does not always come through on what you want, or it doesn't come through in the way that you want. And so it's going to be tough. One of the things I think we're seeing a lot in the space is just trying to come back. What the NCAA is trying to do is basically say, here are our guidelines. You're not following them. Now you're going to be punished. So who can they go after? Is it the school? Is it the collective? Will there be legal challenges? I think there'll be all that if they try to police those things in a more meaningful manner, because they have not so far. The other thing to watch for is, we got a lot of questions about this when Garnet Trust launched last November, tax exempt status. So a lot of collectives have launched trying to be 501c3s. I can't speak to them. I know Garnet Trust is not and never has been. It's set up as an LLC given what it does, but there's tax implications potentially with some of these as well. And that'll be kind of outside of the scope of the NCAA, but that's something to watch. I do think there might be some shifts in the NIL space. People talk about market corrections. I find a lot of that very hard to predict, right? I don't know if any of us would have predicted to this magnitude what we've seen in the NIL space with collectives and some of the kind of pay for play things we've seen. There's been a lot of creativity on that front, really. And I think it's going to be difficult, like I said, to put the genie back in the bottle.
What advice would you have for somebody who wants to get into sports media?
I would go back to what I said earlier. Realize that you have to be good at a lot of things, or try to be good at a lot of things. For me, a lot of people always ask me, what did you were a journalism major, right? And I actually wasn't. And maybe my writing reflects that. I don't know. It might, right? I don't think it's as important to just be this phenomenal writer. I have a lot of people in the media space that I look up to because they're great reporters and great writers. Like some of the people, their storytelling ability, I wish I could buy on eBay or something. Like just the ability to craft those things. Some people are just good at scooping a story. Some people are good at, all those things. But I was a poli-sci major, and I just, I was a little bit more comfortable with language just because that's what God gave me. He didn't give me math or science. He gave me a little bit more of the creative and the writing ability. Not that I'm great at that. So I don't think it's as important to box yourself into, I've got to be this. Back in the day, people didn't have the internet. They picked up the paper. And if you had a job for some big newspaper, you were the man automatically. Now you've got to carve out your niche. You have to fight for it. So you've got to be good on social media, podcasts, video. You have to be able to write. You have to be able to build relationships, scoop stories. You have to be versatile, and you have to be willing to do anything. You need to try to be on the cutting edge, and not just box yourself in. It's not good enough just to write a story. Who cares? That's what I would say.
Last question. If you had to pick one song to describe your work style, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, a song. Man, you got me on this one. Golly, what do people say?
This gets most people. The best, Kristen Hopkins said Steve Austin's theme music, which to me has been my favorite answer so far.
I mean, how do you top that? I mean, I love that song. I listened to it a zillion times as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
The first song actually that popped in my head, and I don't know, so I'll just go with this one, was Welcome to the Jungle. And I don't know why that popped in my head. It wasn't even like as an answer to your actual question, just kind of popped in my head. But when I think about it and flesh it out, like every day is an adventure, so like you really are getting into, like I said earlier, in 2009, I didn't know what I was getting myself into, and it's evolved so much, and there's so many different layers to it. It is truly wild. Like Wes Mitchell, my colleague, and I, we have conversations almost daily of like, what do we do? Like, what are we doing here? Because there's just something new and interesting every day where it's like a jungle. There's just all sorts of different things coming at you.
There you go. Chris, always great catching up, my friend.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate you.